This video is going to talk about boosting your clear speeds in Ravenswatch. I'm mainly focusing on solo play, but we'll add some co-op tips at the end. And if you enjoy these guide videos, feel free to subscribe as I will put them out occasionally. Now, a lot of these scenarios might be very niche or situational, as I don't know what character you're playing, the build, or what camp you're in, or even the variety of enemies that you have. This is how I approach camps in Ravenswatch. When going into a camp, there is a priority chain of enemies that need to be taken out. Healers should always be targeted first, as to not have a big burst of damage go to waste. Hitting them away from enemies can make it harder for them to heal ones out of range. Certain attacks can stagger enemies out of an animation, like Pied Piper's defense, and this should be used if a healer is about to get a heal off. Another reason for hitting them away from enemies is that there is a rare chance that a healer actually heals a healer. They're not programmed to do this, but it can happen if they are close to another enemy that is targeted for a heal. Next are enemies that can spawn other enemies, as having too many things chasing you or attacking you at once can drastically reduce your DPS on certain characters, especially in the early game. These are large spiders, barfing ghouls, and the phoenixes. I'll place broomstick witches after this, as they can be incredibly threatening with their damage and can quickly double hit you if you are near a wall. After that, it becomes more situationally dependent, but elites that aren't summoners should be focused last in most cases, as you'll do more damage if you can take full advantage of the stun window on them, which is easier to do with no enemies around. For example, in a ghost camp, it's better to take out the dashing ghost and the lantern ghost before the screaming ghost to give you more space to focus on them on the stagger. And in pig camps during the day, focus on the spear and scythe pigs to try to get their death explosion to kill chain the rest of the camp and do big damage to the elite hook pigs. Okay, so next I have the big three things that I want to talk about, and this is grouping enemies, baiting attacks, and your iframes. Starting off with grouping enemies, all characters have some form of AoE in their kit, and the easiest way to boost your clear speeds is to make sure you're taking full advantage of this. Let's take Pig Castle for example for this. Every enemy in here is a melee enemy, so they'll all walk towards your character. While it can be tough, the best thing to do in a camp like this is find the elite enemy and stand next to them as you fight to walk the entire group towards them and you. This way, when you're using your attacks, you'll be doing damage to the enemy with the highest amount of health in the camp, while also clearing the rest of the camp. Beowulf, for example, has two strong AoE abilities in his power and special. I'll save his special because it also functions as an iframe, but focused on the basic pigs while also hitting the elite with his power. You would use the same strategy in a tree camp, for example, with the big tree and a bunch of the medium trees that go in for melee attacks. The next part of this comes down to baiting attacks, and while all characters should do this to some extent, I'm going to focus on Carmilla as it's core to her gameplay. Her early game is pretty dependent on her power, and a poor use of it can drastically hurt her clear speeds, as it's on a 10-second cooldown and can waste a lot of blood if used improperly. To be as efficient as possible, you'll want to do what I mentioned earlier and group up enemies as close as you can around an elite enemy. Keep attacking and using your special until you're full on blood, then dash into the middle of them to trigger all of their attacks. Then you can use your defense to quickly get away and set up your power to clear the camp. All enemies have a short cooldown in between their attacks before they can start a new one, so this will give you the most amount of time possible to hold down your power. But say you run into an instance where all enemies are attacking at different times and you aren't able to trigger them because maybe they had just already triggered an attack, and so when you set up your power, they're triggering another one. In this instance, what you can do is actually run away from the enemies. They still will be all grouped up. Run away, get away from them so that none of them are triggering an animation, then re-engage and try to dash into the middle of them and use your defense to separate yourself and use your strong power again. This is also a great way to try to get revives if you're playing in co-op to give yourself the most amount of time possible to be on that revive. Baiting attacks isn't super necessary with every character, but it's incredibly helpful when your main source of damage is a big AoE that has a long animation commitment to pull it off. Now, the final part of the big three is iframes, and this is the last major point that I want to talk about before getting onto some smaller tips. With the previous tips in mind, your iframes become incredibly important, especially on melee characters like Scarlet Wolfform, Beowulf, Aladdin, and Sun Wukong. Unless creating space is a core part of your character's build, like Eruption on Beowulf or Sword in Aladdin, you should always try to stay in the middle of a fight to constantly keep up your AoE damage. If you have an iframe attached to a damage dealing ability like the special on Wolf or Beowulf, then stay in the fight and time this ability with attacks targeted at you. This will end up saving you the seconds that it would have taken for you to dash away from the group and then re-engage. This is a reason why charges are super important on abilities like these, as you'll be able to do this more often and you'll be able to do it back to back if there is a follow-up incoming attack on you. Timing your iframe abilities with enemy attacks becomes crucial to having quicker clear speeds and the higher difficulties of this game. Now here are some quick tips for more specific scenarios. If you have something in your Sandman shop like a damage increase that works for your build, try to find a teleporter as soon as you get enough dream shards, as these can drastically increase your clear speeds. A lot of attacks in this game are front facing only, so you can normally just dash through an enemy rather than away from them, making your engagement time a lot quicker if you don't have an iframe. If an elite is about to be staggered, save your biggest damage dealing abilities for after you stagger them, as it will do more damage. This goes for the White Lady Key Boss in Chapter 1 as well. She will disappear after you reduce her health under 50%, but can't disappear if she is staggered. Try to get your stagger as close as possible to the 50% range if you want to try to burst her down before she spawns more ghosts. If you're fighting a ranged enemy, they tend to walk backwards away from you and can sometimes leave the camp and trigger other enemies. Dodge to the other side of them and start attacking to push them into the center of the camp. This also goes for Pied Piper with his special. You want to keep enemies in his zone as much as possible, and if you have a healer backing out of it, dodge to the other side of it to push her back in. Now this might be obvious, but there's a huge difference maker that I notice in my co-op runs when it's a good run versus a bad run. Enemies have higher health scaling in co-op, so having everyone focus down the same enemy makes camps go a lot quicker, especially on staggered elites. Non-armored enemies don't matter as much, but going from elite to elite is your best bet in co-op. Communicate what enemies you are prioritizing if you have a mic, but if you're playing without one, it's probably best to just focus down whatever enemies your teammates are taking on, especially if you have a Pied Piper with Freezing Trap in your group. In co-op, you also tend to aggro a lot more enemies, so try to enter a camp from the same direction as everyone else, as to only bring in enemies from one side. I also recommend going to the opposite side of a camp as a team once entering to hopefully leash all the enemies from the outside, but to also group all the enemies in the camp and not have them all spread out. Well, there's my guide for getting quicker clear speeds in Ravenswatch. Again, it's weird to make this video as there's so many factors in each specific run that can help clear speeds, so I hope this general information was helpful. Thanks for watching, peace.